Hey everyone, I'm Travis Wright, and you're listening to I'm a Fan Of, your show for music, comedy, and more. As always, if you're a musician, a comedian, or just someone that does something interesting, please reach out to me on Instagram at TravisCanListen. You can find me on Facebook at I'm a Fan Of, or you can reach out to me through the website at I'mAFanOfPod.com. If you just enjoy the show, please follow me there as well, and like and subscribe to the podcast. This episode, I get to sit down and interview an incredible musician who's put together some really fantastic music, Court Hoang. From right here in Fort Worth, Texas. He recently released an album in 2022 called Get Right. Phenomenal album. I have a separate music review. If you'd like to check that out, please look on the podcast page or the YouTube page. It's there as well. But we just had a fantastic conversation about music, his album, him, social things, politics, all the usual stuff that we all enjoy talking about. And seems like a really nice guy. Really enjoy the music, and I'm a bigger fan now that I've got to chat with him. So please enjoy our interview here with Mr. Court Hoang. The I'm a Fan Of podcast. Music, comedy, and more. All right, Court Hoang.
Yeah.
Dude, welcome.
Thanks, man.
I'm so happy. I was talking to my wife on the way in. I was like, I'm pretty sure it's pronounced Hoang. I was like, but if this is the one time where it's the Texas pronunciation of like Hoang or something.
Right.
Like, what's the most common mispronunciation you get?
Hong.
Hong?
Hong or Hong or... No one ever says like Wang or anything like that because they see the H in their brain just like, oh.
Huh.
Yeah, and like Hua is not really a sound that ever starts a word in English.
Yeah.
Same way with like, you know, the really popular Vietnamese name, it's Nguyen.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't start any words with NG in
Right.
that sound. So people are just like, I'm just going to say Win.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's
well, and in Texas, we're just like Nugan. Is that what it is?
Nguyen.
Nguyen?
Yeah. No, I get like telemarketer calls being like, oh yeah, is Court Hogan there? Because they think it must be a typo.
Oh.
Because like, surely.
My wife's name is Paige. And when we were on a cruise one time, you know, you forget that they have workers from all over the world. And I don't remember which, like where they were from. But they kept pronouncing her name Peggy. Because if you think about the way it's spelled, P-A-I, it's pay,
right.
And then G-E is gee. So they were like, Peggy? And we're like, no, that's not it. And then finally we put it together. We're like, oh, Peggy. Oh, Pay. Yeah, that's it. That's us. And that was, so for the rest of the trip, we just answered to Peggy.
Peggy.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Isn't language fun? Welcome to Language with Travis and Court. Dude, this new album, Get Right.
Yeah.
It's pretty incredible, man.
Thank you.
I have so many things we're going to talk about, but the first thing I'm going to talk about is I'm really upset that I found your music so recently because when I was stalking through your Instagram and I saw that your release show was a 13-piece ensemble at a beautiful
amazing,
theater. And I was like, well, great. There's a little piece of time I'll never, ever get to witness. But
yeah.
Tell me about that, man. What was that like? First of all, what was involved in the ensemble?
Yeah. So it was, oh, Lord. Okay. So it was me playing mostly rhythm guitar and vocals. And then I had a lead guitarist. I had my bassist and drummer who were, you know, they're like the three of us are kind of like the core of the band at that time. Mm-hmm. And then actually, well, there's a story there later, but then I had 4 string players. So I had a violist, 2 violinists, and a cello player. And then I had a keys player. I had an additional percussion player who, like, one of his jobs was to hit this, it's like a light fixture. It's like this big solid brass dome light fixture.
Okay.
And don't ask me why, but I have 2 of them. One of them is hanging in my dining room, which I used in one of the instrumental songs on the album as this, like, gong sound.
Okay. That's what I was going to ask you is what is the sound?
Yeah,
so it's
like,
kind of like a gong?
Yeah, it's like this really intense, like, reverberant, almost kind of like a meditation bell, but really deep.
Okay.
And so we had 2 of them, and I was like, well, okay, I've got enough chain. We're just going to like tie it up onto like this little support scaffold and you're just going to hit it when the time comes. And otherwise he was doing a lot of cymbal rolls and like congos and things like that. And then, is that it? No, I had a flute player and a clarinet player.
Clarinet.
I went all out, man. Yeah.
Dude,
so
it's awesome though. I mean, there's been a couple bands that I've seen live that have those extremes of instruments because you're not used to hearing that with more popular styles of music anymore.
It's true.
Right? And even though it's like, you know, more independent rock music, it's still popular considered to, you know, like an orchestra.
Right.
And you just don't hear those instruments. And then when you listen to music that was made in like the 60s, 70s, even a little bit in the 80s. It's like every now and then there'd be like a rock band who just had a flute.
It's in there.
And you're like, this is really good. And, and you forget that those extra sounds that you don't hear all the time, like because you don't hear them all the time, now it sounds amazing.
Right, yeah.
You know, like I literally just did a review of this artist, Charlie Crockett, one of the songs I love. There's this great saxophone solo. And it's like, when was the last time you heard a new saxophone solo? It's called Silver Dagger.
Okay, yeah. On the new,
Yeah, and it's just like, you know, you forget that there's so many more instruments out there besides just guitar, bass, drums, keys.
Yeah, well, it's more fun to get, you know, and when people think of adding more things, it's almost always like, let's put a trumpet or a saxophone in there. Yeah. And I love that, you know, but I'm like a classical geek at heart too. So I'm just like, okay, I want like really orchestral instruments when I can get them, you know. And the hardest part is like sourcing people and, you know, paying
I was going to say, were those just for your release show, were those just good buddies or were you having to hire or mix of both?
So some of them were session musicians from the actual recording of the album. Okay, cool. Which was like, you know, it was the kind of thing where we wrapped and, you know, we finished all the post-production and I was like, I'm getting ready to release it. Do you want to come back and play a show? And like most of them were like, yeah, absolutely. One of them had moved off, you know, to another state. But so we were able to bring them all in and I mean, they were willing to work at a discount, I'll just say, because, you know, a previous customer kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So my producer actually is, he studied music at UT Arlington and he's like, if you need something, he's got it. You know what I mean?
That's cool.
And not only does he have it, he's got someone like classically trained and who is still doing it professionally. They're either teaching or they are.
Yeah, because he knows all the best people that have come through the courses and graduated.
Yeah.
And
and he's got all the hot gossip too, right? He's like, oh no, not this guy. You know, like he's good. He's good. He's kind of a dick. Yeah, exactly. So,
and not the good heroin where he plays really great.
Not the manageable kind of.
Yeah.
Man, that's another lifetime.
So I take it you're more formally trained?
Actually, so with voice, yes.
Okay.
But with all the instruments, I'm self-taught.
Okay.
My parents tried to put me in piano lessons when I was like 5, and I was like I was miserable. I hated it. I was like, no, I'm never going to do this.
Same. We always had a piano in the house, but none of us played. And they put us in lessons at different times, but we just didn't grasp, you know, like this could be fun.
Right.
You know? And,
well, that's the problem, right? Is that you start and it's like, you know, learn this scale, learn this very basic piece, you know, and like you're going to learn music that you probably don't want to be listening to.
Yeah.
You know, so when you're playing it, you're like, I'm not even enjoying what I'm putting out here, you know. But I do regret not sticking with it just for having the skill to be able to like do certain things like improvise and write things, you know, because when you're self-taught, you don't get a lot of the benefit of the experience of the entire history of music, you know what I mean? Because that's what music teachers can do because they have that, you know. And
it unlocks so much by having that foundation. I'm similar. I play guitar, self-taught, and I feel like I'm always looking at music from, you know, like the style and passion and you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's a great way to look at it, but then there's times when you're playing where you're like, I really wish I knew some theory to understand
I wish I was just better at this.
Why I like this or how to quickly get from this to that, you know, all the different, you know, just that base foundation level of music.
Right, yeah.
And, you know.
Yeah, no, I've been working with a jazz group recently and I'm just doing vocals for them. But I'm like, oh, maybe one day I'll be able to do guitar. So I'm like looking at some, you know, learning some jazz standards, things like that on the guitar. And like I do that sometimes when I'm doing like solo gigs, like a lot of the paid corporate kind of things, you know, where they want like Fly Me to the Moon and stuff like that, you know, the cutesy kind of jazz standards. And like, I love to do it, but there's a part of me that's like, I feel like I'm not totally grasping. Like I've learned these songs, but I don't totally understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. Like I know what sounds good and what doesn't, you know. But working with this jazz group, you hear them talk to each other and it's like, it's a foreign language, you know, and they're just like, they're rattling off these terms and saying like, okay, we're going to do this and then we're going to do this. And I'm like, I'm going to sing. Just point at me when it's my turn.
Just catch me up real quick.
Right. No, I don't even need to know.
You're sitting there just looking at the fretboard. You're like, so we're going to move here. Right.
Right. So I've got the charts. I'm just going to follow the charts. Yeah. It's going to be okay.
I always go back and forth of, you know, like, should you start with the structure or should you start learning on your own and then get the structure of music? Because, you know what I mean? It's people, whatever that first introduction is, they play so differently after that. And I always wonder which one is an advantage, you know, learning the structure first and then trying to figure out how to get loose. Because we've all met that player who just can't, They can't improvise. They have trouble making stuff up, but they can play anything you give them.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
But they don't have the imagination, right? It's very structured.
Right.
And then we've all met those imaginative players that just don't have enough focus and discipline, right? You know?
There's a little bit of that.
Yeah, so I always wonder, what that perfect balance is.
I think it's all about personality, man.
Yeah.
Because like you'll find people, one of the like absolute best musicians I've ever worked with had no idea how to read music. He's a sax player, and like you would just give him a key, and he could shred. I don't know what the equivalent of it is.
Yeah, on a saxophone.
He was shredding on the saxophone.
He blew, man. He blew.
He was just ripping it up. But yeah, and it was one of those things where like I couldn't talk to him about like, okay, so because even the basic theory that I know when I'm writing songs, it's sort of like I'm trying to communicate things to him, and he's just sort of like, just say like verse or chorus or something like that, or like tell me when to solo, basic kind of thing. But he could pick it up, and he didn't need the words because he had the music.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like some people, they need the words because it's important to them to make sure that they're being understood and that they are communicating in a way that is going to give them kind of the security. It's more about kind of comfort, like intellectual, and I don't want to say it's like egotistical because it's not about like but it's something in that sort of frontal, like the conscious mind that needs that. Whereas like if you can actually tell that kind of conscious mind to go just like down the street and just grab a cup of coffee while you play the song, then some other kind of magic can happen.
That's the weirdest feeling. It took me forever when you're just playing with someone and you get in that zone that you just described.
It's flow, right?
Yeah, because it sounds so cheesy and like woo-woo, and you're like, this is stupid.
I mean, that's the world I live in, so
but you know what I mean?
I'm all
like,
about the cheesy shit.
Until you experience it, you're like, sure, they were just in the zone. And then you realize, you're like, there was a couple times where one of the guys I played guitar really well with, and he sang, like we were just kind of riffing on an idea he had, and before you know it, there's a song in like 5-6 minutes.
Yep, absolutely.
And you're like, Jesus, how did that just came out?
Those are the beautiful moments.
Yeah, and it felt like, I don't even think we wrote that. That felt like a gift that from the universe that just kind of came in.
Exactly, yeah.
And you realize like it's almost just so defeating to know that you can try, and really you're just hoping for one of those moments.
Do you know what it is, though? Do you know what it is?
No.
In my opinion, and it is my own experience, it's about getting your brain out of the way. That's a big part of it. And your brain is going to tell you can't have those moments until you get good enough. Technically, on a skill level, you can't have those moments because you haven't earned it. I'm doing finger quotes if you're only listening. Sorry. I'm going to try not to do any gestures. But your brain tells you that because it wants to be in control.
Yeah.
Right. But like I said, if you can send the brain away, then a lot of magic can happen that like you're better at any instrument you play than you know. I guarantee it. But what happens is your brain gets in the way and it says, what are we doing again? I need to know what we're doing. And as soon as you start thinking about it, then your fingers are just like, what the fuck was I doing? Like, what am I, and then they stop working,
Yeah.
And you have to be able to free your mind, which a lot of people do by just getting that technical skill down, But even if you're not a great soloist, even if you're not a great, guitarist, you can still be a great improviser. You can do that. You just have to listen.
Yeah, it's kind of how you always play your best when you're on the couch watching TV.
You're not paying attention. Yeah, you're just kind of
and you're like, why can't I play like this when someone's watching? Like, that was incredible.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I guess I've never really thought about it that way, but I know exactly what you mean. You just got to not think about it at all. But it's so hard when you pick up an instrument. That's all you want to do. You're like, what about this? What about that?
Right.
Yeah.
So it's about a comfort level, and if you can have that sense of security without, needing that to come from the idea that like you have mastered something, you can have that sense of security even when it's the first time you've ever tried something,
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm sitting in with this jazz group and like, I don't sing jazz. I learn the songs and I'm thinking like, I'm more a pop singer. This is going to sound weird with the little melismas I'm going to throw in there and stuff like that. But as soon as you start listening to the music and you start just doing it, you're like, oh, damn, I can do this. Okay. I can do it. Okay.
It's still just music.
Right.
Yeah.
It's expression.
So you're formally trained vocally is what you said.
Yeah. So choir nerd, a cappella groups.
I saw the a cappella part.
And all that.
So does that mean, you said you understand the theory from a vocal standpoint?
So in terms of technique, yeah. In terms of like the music theory, it was like books that I had read as a kid trying to like make up for lost time, right? Because I got to like the age of like 13, 14, like every, adolescent male does. And he says, I need to pick up an instrument because now I'm starting to get horny.
That is the number one reason for guitar sales.
It's like
just trying to impress.
Number one.
Yeah.
It's teenage boys.
I just want to get laid.
Right. There are some exceptions, I think, but
not many.
Not me, I will just say. So yeah, so I was trying to make up for lost time, you're like, what the hell am I doing, So you start analyzing, you start breaking things down, and I'm listening to songs that I love, and I'm saying, okay, so what are they doing that is making me fall in love with this? And I wasn't thinking at all from a production standpoint, which is kind of an interesting thing because, with this last album, it was so much more produced than anything I've done because I finally just decided, you know what? I've written the songs and now I'm going to go have fun with sound, and that I've never had more fun making anything than making this last record because I was so focused on not worrying about what was going to be quote unquote marketable. Yeah. Avoiding the finger quotes again.
You can finger quote as much as you want.
There's a limit. I'm sure there's a limit. But I'm not worried about, what's marketable, in the sort of traditional sense. And I'm much more worried about just expressing myself in a way that feels authentic, and having fun while I'm doing it. Because when it stops being fun, then it starts sucking, and you don't want to believe that because you want to say, like, if I suffer enough, then it's going to be better. And it's, and like, to be sure, there's some practice, there's repetition, there's a lot of rehearsal that goes into it, but like, you got to be having fun.
Yeah, it should all be rooted in, I really want to do this.
Yeah.
It's not a chore.
Yeah, ideally it brings joy, right? And in the moments that it does, it's what reminds you of why you do it.
Yeah, there's a moment, when you record and something comes out right. And I don't know about you, but like for me, it's like it hits you and you're like, wow, we made this. Yeah. This did not exist and now it exists. And for once, it sounds exactly like I wanted it to in my mind. Right. Which is such a rare thing, right? Because, like you were saying, just communicating with other musicians, like, here's what I was thinking, here's what I would like. And automatically, they're not on the same page as you because they're not in your mind, experiencing what you're experiencing.
It's an imperfect process, right?
Yeah, and so it's so hard. But then it's like when somehow it collectively comes together and then you hear it played back and you were just in a small room recording it and all of a sudden it sounds like what you wanted it to sound like. You're like, oh my God, this is an incredible feeling. We got to always make music, right?
I will say it's a lot easier when you're producing other artists and not yourself.
Well, it goes back to your brain thing. Like, you're not invested. You're out of the way.
Well, yeah, I'm not looking at this looking for flaws. I'm looking at it as just like, that was fucking awesome.
Yeah, I think musicians understand that. Like, musicians know that there's an end point here, and even though I may always want to be better, like, I can get to a point where I'm happy with it, right? And the comics I bring on the show, there's all these parallels between stand-up comedy and music.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And it's really interesting. Like, they're almost never happy with what they do.
Really?
Yeah, like, it's always just like, I don't know.
Maybe that's the difference,
pretty
right?
Funny.
Yeah, I don't know.
They're just so much more, like, they just have so much more self-hate, than the majority of musicians. And it's really, because you'll tell them, you're like, that was awesome. And they're like, it could have been better.
It was okay.
It was all right. And it's not like imposter syndrome. Like, they genuinely feel
they're
like,
just critical. Yeah.
Oh,
well, yeah. And I've thought about comedy because
really?
I see, and I would never want to like do it. And there's a reason for that because it's so vulnerable. Yeah. Right. Because you have nothing. Because even you have your voice. Yeah. But like, your voice is just a delivery mechanism for like these words, so like, it's like writing a book, but then like, you don't just get to just publish the book and be done and move on. You have to like go and like read the book to people all the time, and some people are going to hate the book because they don't even know what they're getting into. Right. So when I have moments with music where like, I'm singing and I'm not playing an instrument, right, that feels a little bit vulnerable, but I mean, there's nothing, as far as I can tell, that compares to like what the comics do because it's so.
You don't feel like when you sing. Well, first of all, where did you sing a cappella? Where was that?
It was in college.
College. Okay, so you're part of like an a cappella group in college.
Yeah.
You wouldn't think
I was that guy.
We'll get to that in a second. But
yeah, we made it to regionals.
Is that? Did you really?
No.
Oh, okay. Did you not feel like that was as vulnerable as like a stand-up comic? Because you don't have any instruments to hide behind.
Right, but you're not alone, right? You're in a group.
True.
And that's because I thought about that too. I was like, okay, The closest I can tell you, like I do live looping sometimes, and when I do solo live looping with my voice, that is probably the closest I think that I get to that kind of vulnerability from an insecurity standpoint. You know what I mean?
Are you just live streaming it, or are you
No, it's
doing
like,
it in person?
Yeah, when I say live looping, so it's like I have a looping pedal.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I didn't know if you were doing it like online.
I do it in live shows.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So like I'll put down the guitar, I'll tell the band to take a break, and I'll do a few of those, and like yeah, it's just me, and like I'll start with like, you know, some like bass and percussion, and then I'll, you know, but it's all my voice, right, that I'm doing, and I'm looping it over and over again, and like the timing has to be very precise, right? Like you can't fuck this up, because if you make a mistake, then like everything, it compounds after that, right? It just gets worse and worse until finally everyone's just like, why does he think he could be doing this? You know,
there's a great like TikTok of a guitarist showing you how horrible a delay pedal is on a guitar.
Lord,
like when you finally do hit the wrong note and he just stops and it just rings out the
and
wrong
it's just
note
like
forever.
constant. Yeah. that's a nightmare, right?
Yeah,
like,
very similar to your looping situation.
Yeah,
like,
a little bit. Yeah, because like, yeah, you know, because some of these loops take like 2 minutes to start, right? Yeah, I don't even start the song really until I built the whole loop sometimes, and I'm trying to do these melody things on top of that. But like, you know, let's say I get a minute and a half in and I screw it up, then it's like, I'm probably just gonna bail on the song. I'm not gonna make you listen to that again. We're gonna move on. You know, and it happens.
That just seems like a great skit though, of like the guy who keeps stopping his loop and like, okay, we're gonna get it this time.
His name is Owen Pallett. He's a real musician.
Oh, he actually does that?
Yeah, no, yeah, he's. I don't even know if he still performs, but this was back in
like he's just really bad, or he does it as a comedy bit.
No. I mean, like, he's just very critical again, where it's like, okay, the audience would never know, but he'll do something and he's just like, nope. And he'll just stop, and he will start it over, and he'll make the audience watch him do it, and they love him. Like he's an amazing musician, but he's just one of those people that's like, I am going, like, it's going to be perfect, or you're not going to have it, kind of a thing, you know. And I think there's a balance to be struck there somewhere, you know, especially in live performance. It's like, but it is kind of what separates, you know, I would say professional musicians from, you know, the hobbyists. Is like it's easy to get a perfect recording. I say that it's not, but it's relatively easy to get a perfect recording. It's really hard to get a perfect live performance.
Yeah, I struggle with how I feel about, you know, the record versus the performance.
Yeah,
all the time.
It's a big thing,
because I used to think, you know, I wanted to sound exactly like the record, and now I've given it more leeway where it's like it doesn't need to sound exactly like the record, but I still have this standard of like I.
Got to be tight enough.
Yeah, and like, you know, I'm going to be really critical of like our local scene, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but
oh shit,
everything goes in these waves, right? Like you'll have these big bursts of like, we've got a lot of great bands right now or whatever, and I feel like there's this social contract between fans and between performers.
They have to look the other way a little bit. They do.
Well, I think we're all missing the mark a little bit in terms of like people who enjoy watching music and people who enjoy creating music in the DFW area. And what I mean by that is like, I think we're all forgetting, like on one side as a fan, you have to make an effort to be like, I am going to live shows. I'm going to purchase something from this band to help support them. I'm going to, you know, when they put out a new video or a song,
share it on social media.
I'm going to give one full listen. And if I enjoy it, I'm going to tell somebody about it.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Right? That's the social contract from the fan standpoint. It costs you nothing most of the time. And if you enjoy the band, you're going to go to the show, right? Now, the flip side of that is what the band's obligated to do is if I pay money to come to your show, I need to know that you rehearsed,
right?
That you really thought about like how good.
Show me something cool.
How good can we make this? Because this person, I mean, you've got a wife and kids. It's like this person got a babysitter. They came out. This is a thing. It was a hassle.
It is a whole fucking thing.
Bring me a
Get
great
me out the door.
set. And I think it's probably pandemic induced, right? Everybody just kind of like got beat down in the pandemic because they couldn't perform or go out. And I think we're having to like relearn as a scene, like, okay, guys, like you're going to put on phenomenal shows and we're going to pay money to come see them. And then if you're really great at the show, we're going to buy some merch and just build the ecosystem back up.
I do believe that like pandemic definitely played a role in that, right? Everyone had to take a break, right? And when you took a break, it seemed to me like a lot of the artists decided, okay, now's the time to produce something. Now's the time for sessions. Now's the time for recording. Now's the time for, you know, recording music and putting it out because like we can't have the live shows. It's not going to happen. We're all broke. We're trying to figure out what we're going to do because we lost our jobs. And like, you know, there's a lot of that happening. And now I do think you're starting to see these live acts who are like, are we still doing this? Because they're still putting things out, but they're not really playing shows. And I've been seeing this a lot. And it's really interesting because like, I haven't talked to these people, but I kind of get it, because like I'm at a point right now where like, I don't like to play a lot of shows. Like I will take a show if I feel like it's going to pay well and, or it's going to be a really cool venue, good opportunity, touring bands to meet, all that kind of stuff. Or it's for a cause that I care about, right? Like I'll gladly donate a performance if it's going to help people in my community and beyond. But I'm very limited as far as like the time that I have, just with the kiddos and with my wife. And
yeah, you don't have time to go do the bar show at 11:30 for 6 people anymore.
And it's not my livelihood, So I'm privileged to be able to like have a job that allows me to do this on the side. And like I appreciate that. And when I was in my 20s and I was living in Austin and I was doing the working musician thing and I was hustling, I loved it then, But yeah, there's just it's not right for my life anymore, right?
It feels like that's almost dying though, doesn't it? It feels like
I would like to think so.
But I mean, really, when was the last time you went somewhere that had a thriving music scene where people were just walking down the street and just discovering like, oh wow, I found this new artist that I absolutely love. It feels like that is becoming a thing of the past.
Well, okay. So I can't speak for what happened in Dallas because, I wasn't here during what I consider to be kind of formative years in sort of what we're seeing right now. But in Austin, in like the, 2010 to like 2016 or 17, like it was a very important period of time in terms of like Austin's development as a city, right? So you have all these tech companies coming in. You have a lot of people who are either forced to start working for these tech companies because real estate prices are going up, or they're just getting kicked out and they're having to leave the city. And all the artists are just having to leave, right? Or they're getting those kind of stable gigs where it's like, I'm going to host an open mic and I get paid a few $100 to do that, every week or every couple of weeks or something like that. But you have to fill your calendar, like literally, 6 days a week. You're playing minimum 8 to 10 shows in order to afford rent.
Yeah.
So you have like housing affordability on one side. You have venues in Austin especially. And like I said, I'm not going to speak to Dallas or Fort Worth, but like in Austin especially, you have venues who don't pay. They don't, because they can take their pick of poor college students who already have room and board, right?
Yeah.
And they'll play for nothing because they don't care. It's just an experience for them, right? Whereas you have these working musicians who, don't have a union, they don't have any way of guaranteeing any kind of pay for themselves. They have no choice but to accept, dirt pay or go somewhere else.
Yeah.
So what you see now in Austin is like, it's South by and it's ACL, but the local music scene is dead.
I feel that way too. I know there's probably great musicians and bands there.
They're there.
But they're not getting it.
They're absolutely there.
Yeah.
But they can't gig because they don't get paid to gig.
Yeah. And there's probably, there's like a couple spots that still respect that. What you were saying about the pay and the availability of the artist, right? That also is like kind of another part of that contract of like your scene, right? It's like venues, from my perspective, here in DFW especially, but just all over wherever I go, there's definitely this idea of like, we're the venue, we can book who we want, and also if you're lucky enough that we book you, like you better bring people, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of the way it is, where it's like, hold on.
It's a power dynamic, right?
Yeah, and it's like, but this is a group thing. Like we both need to win. The band wants people here, the bar wants people here, the venue wants people here, whatever.
The fans want people there.
Exactly.
I don't want to go to a show that's dead. You know what I mean?
So it's like, when was the last time you saw some local venues just do some incredible promotion for their shows that were coming up next month?
Well, okay, so
you rarely see that,
right? Well, but there's it's hard though, right?
I know it's hard, but nowadays with social media, email list, all the different things you can do, it's like, I don't need you to go have like billboards and commercials and all this expensive stuff. But man, it takes nothing to do a couple creative posts online to help support. Like, hey, literally just like, find your charismatic bartender that works there to be like, hey guys, it's so-and-so, at this venue, this bar, whatever, we're going to have these shows coming up this month. Like, I'm really excited about these bands. I like this band. I don't know anything about this one, but people say they're good. Like, like just be yourself and just promote a little bit. Totally free. You got a cell phone, just throw it up. And again, I think everybody collectively has just kind of forgotten, like, we've all got a little tiny part to play, and then it's really, really cool. And I don't know what beat them all down, but it feels like it's always dragging now.
Yeah, it's money.
What do you mean? From money? Money in what way?
From my perspective, right?
Yeah.
So, okay. So it's hard to get a band hyped for a show if they're not getting paid.
True.
I mean, they can do it, but they cannot do it every week for 10 years straight.
No.
If they're getting paid shit and nothing. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, ticket prices they're a little higher than they were, which I understand, right? Everything's a little more expensive than it was. These venues, a lot of them need more staff than they have. And either they can't afford or they won't pay for the staff that they need. One job that's a big job is social media manager, right? And like, if you don't have someone whose job is to do that, then you're falling behind, right?
Right.
And it's one of those things where, like, yeah, of course you could just have someone pull out a phone and pop it on Facebook, right? But there are costs involved with all these things, right?
Yeah.
So,
and I know there's more behind it. Like, if you have a true social media manager, they're doing more than just putting up a post. And I know there's more to it. I've had friends who have worked as the social media person for different companies. Yeah. And like, I understand there's more to it. Yeah, it's a full-time job.
Yeah. I mean, it's a job that pays like $300,000 a year for a lot of people. You know what I mean? It's not like, it's not a job for like a college intern necessarily. Yeah. You know what I mean? It could be, but like, if you want it done really well, then like, you have to have someone who's studied it and understands how it works and everything.
Yeah. But also, like, in this age of, show business, like, isn't that kind of almost just a built-in cost of doing business now? Like, you can't ignore it at this point, right?
I would like to think so. And one really interesting thing is that the tech is now very accessible, but the knowledge is not. Right. And TikTok is sort of actually changing that, because people are able to share information in ways that like they kind of couldn't really before, in a way that's much more directly accessible, right? Because if I'm going to go on YouTube and look up how do I do social media management, right? Then I'm going to get like 5,000 people who want me to buy their course,
and none of them have actually successfully managed any social media.
I mean, who knows?
Right. Like, there's no credentials.
Yeah. So anyone can be an expert if they have enough followers, and anyone can get enough followers if they buy enough followers. So it's this question of like, there's I think a lack of trust in a lot of it, right? So if I'm a venue manager and I'm looking for a social media team or expert or just a hire, right? It's like, okay, you want me to pay you how much to do something that I don't understand? It's too easy for me to get scammed, fleeced, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But the reality is that like, you still need that person. You still need the job to be done, right? So I feel like there's sort of a disconnect in terms of like a lot of these venues, especially, in Fort Worth, a lot of the venues are very like, they're down home, like that. They're not necessarily dive bars, but they're, well, some of them are proudly dive bars, and they like that.
And not in a negative way, but they just always feel like, if you want to slow down a little bit and go back like 3 to 5 years, Fort Worth's just a little more chill. Like, it's just the wave of whatever the current fad is hits them a little later. They're just relaxed over there.
I don't know, man. I mean,
you don't think so?
Well, I'm boots on the ground, right? So
I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean it in like...
it sounds negative. I'm gonna be honest with you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm phrasing it poorly.
And this is me coming from like, my family, my dad's family is from Vietnam. So like, I'm used to hearing a lot of like talk about the quote unquote, third world, and like how primitive and behind and things like that. And it's, the reality is, if you're assuming that Fort Worth is taking its culture from Dallas, then sure. But that's not a fair assumption to make.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
So that's a different conversation. I'm sorry. What I do want to say though is that it's a very different vibe, right? It's like, it's very chill. It's very come as you are, which is one of the things I love about it. I grew up in Dallas, and Dallas is very, it's a great place to shake hands. You know what I mean? It is a great place.
First of all, I live in Dallas, but you can go ahead and make fun of it as much as you want.
Absolutely, right? Yeah. And
they say,
as someone who grew up in Dallas, like I love to make fun of Dallas.
Yeah, and like they say keep Austin weird and keep Dallas plastic.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Like, it's just a snobby, phony area of Texas.
Right. Yeah. And on the drive over here, like you start just seeing the impact that has on people on the road, right? Because the way that people drive is sort of like, they're competitive drivers. Why is that a thing? Like, why is it a thing to get in front of one more car?
I have to get there, man.
I know, and it's easy to laugh about it, but like the reality is, like, if you break it down, it is like it's just patently absurd. Like this idea that like I have to get in front of you, specifically you, white car in front of me. I don't know why, but I have this need because like, you know, we need to like have this feeling of control and of power in our lives, right? That we don't have because we work in these spaces that make us feel powerless and worthless, right? And I don't want to get too anti-capitalist here.
You can.
I know. But
I'm anti-capitalist.
But I don't want to. Yeah, I mean, like we've built a system that like it makes it really hard for anyone to truly thrive in and be happy in, you know? And when I meet people that are thriving and are happy, my first thought is, well, you must be rich. Because otherwise, how could you possibly? And that's not always true, right? It's not a rule, but it's just one of those things that like you live in this system and you start taking things like that for granted, right? That like it's not really possible to be truly deeply happy unless you have money, right? And power and control over the things in your life that you feel like you need to have control over, right? And that's because that's what we're told. So I don't know. I don't want to lecture. But Dallas embodies that in a way that like is scary to me, where I'm just like, I see the people of Dallas and I'm just like, are you aware of how much you must be suffering? Because in Fort Worth, we're very aware of how much we're suffering.
I totally understand it. One of the best ways I've seen both cities that was just kind of eye-opening is I'm sorry, listeners. We're going to talk about running. Sorry, but I've in the last couple years of my life have gotten into running and run marathons.
Oh wow!
And I have run the Dallas and the Fort Worth one 2 years in a row. And so you're seeing these different parts of the city that you've never seen before, and you're on foot. You got time, and I'm not a fast runner.
Just looking.
And it is what I noticed is Dallas. Both crowds were really fun, like supportive crowds when you're running, right? But the Fort Worth one was just more down home was the best way to put it. I think the way you said
chill, a little bit.
Okay, for instance, like whenever we started the Dallas Marathon, you know, it's sponsored by BMW. They've got like the news stations out there hyping you up. There's like confetti cannons and smoke and rap horns, like bah, 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 bah.
Of
and
course.
You know, group number 3, crowd C, are you ready to go? Let me hear you out there. And like they're hyping you up. And the Fort Worth one, you know, they still had like music and they're hyping you up. But like before you started, it was literally like the person who puts on the marathon or something. I don't know. It was just some guy who was high up on the committee or whatever.
Fred, yeah.
Yeah, it was Fred. And he's like, Corral C, good morning. You guys are looking good.
What's up? Yeah.
Thanks for making it out to the Cowtown Marathon.
Right.
We want you guys all to be safe. As soon as they get down a little bit down there, we'll get you off and going and just have a great time.
Anyone want a beer while we're here?
Yeah, and it was just very like it was more. Yeah, like you felt like Dallas was like, we've got to make this incredible, and Fort Worth was
a
like,
hype train, man.
You guys are already incredible.
Okay, so but there's it feels like it's really easy to shit on Dallas that way, but like again, it's like it's part of existing in this society and in this world, right? You got to make a name for yourself. You got to do, and you know, I see Fort Worth kind of doing this as well, right? They're getting drawn into this feeling like we need to put ourselves on the map. You know, we need to be, you know, doing a lot of like work with tourism and with music as well. You know, that we've been trying to like do more outreach and stuff like that. And like I love that. I want that, but I want to make sure it's coming from a place of like, we want to share this with people and not from a place of like, we need to amass wealth and power as a city. It starts to feel a little bit like, what are we doing? Like, just chill. Like,
well, and it all comes down to, you know, I mean, who's running the show in your city and what do they want? What are their intentions, right? Because like, okay, here in Dallas, for instance, it's, you know, Deep Ellum is probably doing the best it's ever done in so long in terms of the construction, the amount of people that are down there. Like it's becoming
financially, yes.
Yeah. And it's becoming more of a neighborhood instead of just the place you go for shows, bars, clubs, whatever.
Right.
But that's the argument, right? Is the old school Deep Ellum people are like, I hate all of this. I miss the old school Deep Ellum. And then you have people who are kind of in the middle like me where it's like, I like the old Deep Ellum except for how like stabby and gunshotty it felt whenever I was down there. Yeah. And now it feels, it's like, yeah, it still has problems, but like now it feels much safer than it ever did, even though it has issues still.
Right.
But also, you know, you can't get a affordable apartment down there. So the people who are going to be moving down there, they're not going to line up with the identity of the older Deep Ellum. So it's just going to slowly lose that old identity, and it just depends on how many years it's going to take.
And then it just becomes another, like, suburban sprawl,
Yeah.
And the hardest thing for me is wanting culture, right? But you cannot have culture without culture makers. And you cannot have culture makers without the freedom to create. And if you were working, 2 full-time jobs or 3 or 4 part-time jobs, and you are raising kids on your own with very little or no support in terms of childcare, in terms of, financial support, then you don't have time or headspace to be creating anything.
Yeah.
So where's the culture coming from? You have to import it. Once you run it out of town, then you have to buy it back. And these cities are way too happy to do that. They are far too happy to do that. That drives me crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's why you end up with places that only have venues for touring acts.
Right.
They don't have any good smaller mid-sized clubs where you can have a local following.
I guess when I say we're missing something, that's really what we're missing is we have the infrastructure here. We struggle on the lower and mid levels of music support.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's if you went up and asked the average music fan, where's an incredible open mic where you can see some of our local singer-songwriters?
Right.
Only a handful are going to know where those actually are.
Yeah.
The musicians do.
Sure.
And then if you are like, hey, what's a great venue I can just go to on a Friday, and I'm not listening to a band at a bar, like I'm going to a venue to watch a show, but I can trust it's going to be a good band.
And I don't have to pay $50 for a ticket.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's hard because even the good mid-level venues, it's like they have to rely on touring acts now. Of
course, yeah.
And now you're just hoping those touring acts are putting on a local opening act with them.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
Good luck. And then you're, like you said, you're back to if you want to be on it, you can. It doesn't pay anything. And if you don't want it, we'll find somebody else.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think the balance is of... what's the balance of having your creators, your artistic minds, in a society that works with capitalism, where the venue has to make money and everybody's got to pay their bills?
I mean, I think,
how do you do it?
I think at the heart of it, you have to approach it from the mindset of there's enough, there's plenty. The mindset of scarcity is what tells us the venue can't afford to pay you, or the patrons can't afford to pay these things. The reality is there's plenty of money, right? It's just not here. So where is it, right? So how do we reallocate funds to the people that need those funds in order to create these types of spaces, in order to create the types of community that we want to be seeing, that give our lives meaning? It's kind of a soapbox for me, but I don't need another Tomahawk missile. I don't. I'm sorry. I think we've got enough,
Yeah.
But we could take some of that money and we could do a lot of really cool shit with it. You know what I mean? And that's one of the things that I love about Fort Worth, actually, is that Fort Worth does put a lot of money into local arts and local artist development and local arts community. It's just not enough yet, because we need, and this is, I think, one of the reasons that they're trying to get it kind of more, quote unquote, on the map, to get more attention from investors and things like that. But the reality is that we have some incredibly skilled and talented people, and we have some really creative, amazing artists, and we don't need to be known for just one of them, right?
Excuse me.
Can you guess which one? Yeah.
So I know which one. No.
Yeah. So if you approach it from this mentality of there's enough room at the table for everyone, then it becomes a question, like you were saying, of how can we work together? How do we make this happen together? Because no one can do it by themselves, and no one can dictate it into being. That's not how creativity works. You can't force creativity, as like you were saying. When your brain tries to take over and say, we're going to write a song now and it's going to be fucking dope, that's not how it works. You know what I mean? You have to let yourself enjoy the act of creating. You have to give yourself space. You have to give yourself time. You have to give yourself awareness, in a sort of non-egoistic way. I'm going to get real hippy-dippy.
Go for it.
Yeah, because my creative process as a songwriter is very much that, right? I have to sit down, and if I'm sitting down saying, it's time to write a song, it's time to go to work, here we go, we're going to write a song, I put out just the most derivative, annoying, pointless shit that I'm like, yeah, someone probably likes this, but like this is this doesn't need to exist. The world doesn't need this, you know. Whereas like if I can sit down and like give myself that time and space and, you know, quiet my mind enough, you know, you do your meditation or you pray or you know, whatever it is, like you like I said, you just send your brain down for a coffee and you let the part of you that has become aware of your brain talking all the goddamn time, you let that listener be the one who then gets to speak. And it's amazing the things that come out of that. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's a wonderful thing. And it surprises you, right? You see things coming out of you. You're like, I didn't even know that was in there. And it's like, maybe it was in there, or maybe you're allowing something else to come out of you, you know, that is maybe also part of you. And it's all, I don't want to get too religious, but the point to me is that like, if you don't give artists that kind of space, and they're not, you know, like I said, like financially privileged enough to be able to create that space for themselves, then you can't expect it. You certainly can't demand it. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And the reason these bars can turn away bands is because so many of these bands are writing shit from their heads. And like it doesn't hit you anywhere. It's just it's sound. It's just noise, you know? And like I like noise rock sometimes, but like, and I like to get stupid sometimes, you know, like just put on some like top 40, like there's a place for it. Entertainment definitely has value, you know, in and of itself. But like, there's the kind of culture making that I think we're talking about, like that has to come from somewhere else. That has to come from a different place in the artist, you know.
It seems like, again, like going back to venues too, like you said, it's okay to have your top 40 bar cover band experience, right? Yeah. Because there's some people where they're like, I'm not looking for anything deep. I just want to unwind from this hard week.
I mean, you ever been to a wedding? Like
exactly.
That's what it is,
exactly.
You know?
But you do want that venue or a couple venues that you know where it's like, hey man, if you want to hear great music, you know, this is where you like, and they take pride on like, we have this roster of people we book and we pay so that we keep our venue, you know, the credibility of our venue as a, like if you want to see some local bands or some bands that tour through that you may not typically see, like they're not big enough for this huge venue yet, but they're going to come here. And like you were talking about some of the ideas of the money's there, right? And I do believe that. I think everybody is just a little too greedy now, right? And that a lot of people have to say, you know, like this is the cost of doing business. Like if I'm going to run a venue, paying these bands, paying these musicians, it's part of it. It's just as important as, you know, paying the light bill, right? If I'm going to keep quality musicians coming back to play at my venue. And even though they can get away with not doing it, you know, there should be an obligation of like, no, I want to though. That way they know we're a place they can trust as an artist. Right. You know, like we're we're on an artistic side as you as well. And saying like, you know, I could make X amount of dollars and screw these people over, or I can make a little less and we're all super happy and I don't have to think about anything.
Imagine if they didn't have to make that choice.
Right.
Right. Imagine if like, let's say somebody, I don't know, somebody were able to just like give them a little bit of extra money and say, you know what, like book the best fucking acts you can because it's important to this city and the people that live here.
You mean in the form of like grants from the city, those types of things?
Grants, stipends. I mean, like, yeah, sure. I feel like, you know, and or supplementing the artists directly and saying like, okay, we will pay for your artists so you can be more selective about your booking and you can book the artists that you want to book, whether or not you feel like you're going to be able to, you know, sell tons of drinks tonight.
Are there cities that do that?
I mean, there are, yeah.
Yeah.
And
I'm just curious how well it works because it sounds great, you know?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, Fort Worth, a couple of years back had stipends that they were giving out for musicians to go on tour. You know, they were saying like, we'll give you
you're representing.
We'll
Fort
give you
Worth.
like a travel stipend. Yeah, exactly. So you can apply.
Oh,
you know,
is that
for
kind of
one
what
these
I think
travel
Summer Dean
grants.
did that, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah.
And this was, like 2019, I want to say. Like,
okay. Yeah. That's kind of ringing a bell.
Pre-pandemic. Yeah. So there were some really cool opportunities that came out of that. And like Dallas, I know also does a few things. But my biggest issue with Dallas is that when anyone wants to put money into music in Dallas, it's music for a very specific kind of person, you know, which tends to be older and maybe a little less tan, and, so you get these really cool, like, they keep saying like, oh, we want to bring classical music like to the streets. So like we're going to have these really cool, and those programs are amazing, and it's wonderful to bring music in any form to people, but at the same time it's sort of like, okay, well, that's not necessarily the music that they're listening to and connecting with, right? It could be, and I appreciate that. I appreciate you not making it entirely exclusive the way that you used to. But at the same time, it's like, if you're going to bring music to your community, then like maybe see what kind of music your community wants.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what they connect with. And, I think that Fort Worth does a pretty good job, I would say, of trying to capture that. Their outreach is pretty diverse in terms of like the types of artists they like to bring together. But the problem is that like very little of it's actually centralized, right? Mm-hmm. So you have like individual, like even neighborhoods or like groups who want to put on events, and they source from, a pool. And then it starts to become a little bit like a club, right?
Right.
Which is great. Unless you're like me and you have 3 kids and like you can't go to all of like the music mixers and like go to, and these types of things. And I always feel bad because I'm like, I want to be supporting more and I want to be contributing more and participating more, in the music community and in the community at large, but I'm just not in a place in my life where I can do that.
Yeah. I only have 1 kid. So the thought of doing any of this with 3 kids is beyond. Like I don't know how people do it with more than 1 kid.
It's fun.
Fun. Yeah, that's great. Fun. There were no air quotes there, but there should have been. I mean, it is like, it's great, but like, man, even before this interview, it's like we're just having meltdowns over the most, mundane things.
I mean, I left the house with, like 3 children like lying on the floor, fussing and yelling, and my wife just looking at me like,
well, I think, and I think that's another difficult part for fans is, I think with artists, it's so easy to separate, right? You're on a stage. You're holding a guitar. There's a microphone in front of you. These things separate you in a way. Like, it's hard to humanize artists if you don't know them. Mm-hmm. If you're just watching them on a stage, it's hard to go like, this person probably has a day job. They probably have a family. They're probably putting in all these extra hours.
I talk about all that shit on stage. So
yeah, well, that's good. That's good. But I mean, and I think that's one of the good things with social media and everything that's going on. People can talk shit on it. I do all the time, but it is great at humanizing these acts. So then people are like, I should go support the show because, I know they work a 40-hour a week job still.
I would say like it gives acts the opportunity to share their authentic selves.
Yeah.
Some artists don't take that opportunity.
They still have to be authentic, right? Yeah.
Well, no. And it's not even that. It's like I can share things about my personal life and that's fine. But what I mean is like, I see a lot of musicians, it's the ones that have like 1 or 2 or 300,000 followers that do this, right? And it's just glamour selfies, and that's it.
Well, because they're stuck in the like, I'm marketing all the time. It's
but you're as much a model at that point as you are a musician, or more so.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not what I want.
Mm-hmm.
And I think social media is great because it gives you that opportunity to share whatever you want, And if genuinely what you want is to be sharing that, then like, more power to you.
Mm-hmm.
But I also do appreciate that like it does make it more possible to humanize.
Yeah. It just depends on how it goes, man. Well, I think we're still figuring out.
It's your decision. You know what I mean?
And I think we're all still figuring out like what exactly social media is. I think we're still figuring out what the internet is.
We're in baby phase.
Yeah. And it's like, I think it's going to blow our minds when we're all 80 and we look back and we're like, oh my God, we used it like that. That's how we use this.
We used it to like learn things.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? Yeah.
Yeah. I'm pretty excited to see how the future goes. Like, it's weird. I'm very, very pessimistic on one day and then incredibly optimistic on the other day about the future.
That sounds a lot like being human.
You know what I mean? Because you're just like, on one hand, you're like, it's all burning. The planet's burning. All politics are corrupt. Nothing matters. And it's all going to fail. And then the next day, you're like, I mean, it is kind of the best time in human history to be alive, though, isn't it? Like, everything is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I feel like every time in human history has been that. It's been the best and the worst, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Always. Yeah. I want to get back to your album a little bit, though. Sorry, we're drifting. Because you were talking about, and it goes in line with kind of what we're talking about, but you were saying like you didn't want to sit down and write just like songs that people like. Which is
that's
Which I know what you mean.
That's not not the headline here. I don't think.
I know.
No.
No. I know what you mean though. I'm a huge fan of albums with a concept, a theme, which clearly this one does, and but I love the little interludes you put between tracks.
Yeah.
How would you describe them? Like, what made you want to put those into your album? The little breaks. So people who haven't listened to it yet, it's literally like minute and a half.
The shortest one's like 45 seconds.
Yeah,
the longest one's
musical
minute and a half.
Arrangements.
It's just instrumental. No vocals.
Yeah.
Except like, okay, so
maybe some ambient background vocals. But,
right. So there were two things that sort of that fueled this. One was like when I started putting the track list together, I was like, "This is too intense. This is too much. I need to give you a break." So I was like, okay, where do we need some breaks? So like after some of the more like what to me are more of the intense songs, or before more of the intense songs, I was like, okay, I'm going to put this here. The title track, for instance, like the song right before it is it's meant to be like an introduction to that song, right? Sort of just like it's a palate cleanser, if you want to call it that, right? But I meant it sort of more like from like a vibe or like an emotional sort of standpoint rather than sort of from a an intellectual standpoint. So that was the first thing. The second thing was, again, it was just like I just want to do something fun, right? And like I could involve, like I got my kids involved, like they're recorded on here with some of these tracks. Like there's one that starts with this like breathing, like, but I looped it and layered it and like put on these effects in it, so it starts sounding like ocean waves, and it's this kind of weird, just like it's just there, but it's like it's my daughter, just standing in front of the mic. I have a picture of her. Just it's the funniest thing, right?
Yeah.
And like she named one of the other songs she named Toucan,
but spelled TWO.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, her idea was like Toucan, the obviously the animal.
Yeah.
But I was like, I'm going to see what I can do with that. So that song's actually about her. There's two flutes and one of them's me and one of them's her. It's sort of this idea. And like, you're kind of watching them sort of like interplay and like this experience of like watching your kids growing up in front of you and like having this recognition that like all life is impermanent, right? And all of this is happening in like a minute and a half. Like, So it's like this whole thing. So they're kind of little worlds in and of themselves. But I think they do, in the context of the album, they serve the purpose of sort of, just giving you a little break. And actually each one of those has a mime piece that goes with it. And this is not like pantomime, it's called corporeal mime. So it's like this theatrical like art that it would take me way too long to really explain, but it's something that I studied when I was in school. And I like choreographed these kind of movement pieces with each of these. So one of them, like I said, is sort of about like this watching my daughter grow up. One of them is it's sort of about just the desire to sort of just like leave all your shit and like go live in the woods, like St. Francis, that bitch kind of thing, just like go out in the wilderness and like just fuck all of this, because I feel like we all have that feeling sometimes. Yeah. That one's called To the Woods. And then the other one is it's about like grief, death and mourning. And, so they all have kind of like, they are these kind of little worlds in and of themselves, but I felt like I wanted to put them in there just because they echo some of the things that are in a lot of the more traditional songs.
Have you ever considered making a full album like that? Because I found myself with those pieces wanting more.
Oh, cool.
Like I listen to a lot of music.
I appreciate that.
Well, I listen to a lot of music when I'm doing more mundane things like walking the dog at night, that kind of stuff, mowing the lawn, whatever. Yeah. And that's my time because, again, the brain's shut off. I can just absorb music, And then, you catch yourself like, it's nighttime and it's kind of cooling off right now, or over the weekend when it was like a little warm and it's beautiful outside. And then these little palate cleansers come in and you're like, man, this is kind of like a little soundtrack to
like a little zen
what
happening.
I'm doing right now.
It's
yeah.
Cool.
And I felt myself going like, wow, you could write, if you could stretch that out to 5-6 minutes of just, it doesn't have to even go anywhere.
Right.
But
just vibes. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I don't think there's, I don't know many people making stuff quite like that in terms of like a full album.
Right.
I know they'll make snippets of it, the only person maybe doing something similar to that. Are you familiar with a local guy named, or he's not local anymore, but Bometheus? He moved up to Chicago now. Not the same, but he's also in that realm of like, I'm going to play what I would like to play.
Right. Well, he's a violinist too, so he kind of comes from like classical background a little bit too, and
yeah.
like, incorporates some of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what seemed fun is it was a very man, I'm having a hard time today explaining things without them coming out in slightly insulting ways, because I almost said it's a way to take more complex themes and make them easily digestible, but I don't like saying easily digestible.
That's okay. Yeah, no, I mean, accessible maybe is the word.
Sure.
I don't know.
But yeah, I did. I found myself going like, oh, that one's only a minute and a half. Okay. Like I would love to see if you could play around with that at some point and go like, I did 6 songs, they're longer, and it's just instrumentals.
Just vibes. I'm going to call it just vibes.
That's fine. Yeah, whatever. But having fun with it like the way you were describing.
Well, and that's like, it's very freeing in one way, because like when you start placing limitations, you find yourself having a lot more freedom. And it sounds really weird, but like once you have something in place as sort of a guideline, then you're not overthinking it so much, because it's sort of like you can see there's boundaries here. Okay, now I can do whatever I want within these boundaries, right? So for me, it was sort of like, I know these have to be short. I know they have to be instrumental. Let's go play. You know, and I could play a lot with textures and sounds and things like that. It was so much fun, you know. And again, like the whole production process was that. But when it's a song that you've sat down and it's like it's verse, chorus, bridge, verse, you know, whatever, then you're a little closed in there, and it's sort of like, why do you keep coming back to the same song structures? You know, you could do anything
you want.
But when you can do anything, you stick to what's safe.
Yeah.
Right. So when you give yourself just something, even like arbitrarily, like some kind of guideline, and saying, you know, let's just not have words on this one. Right. Then you can start experimenting. Okay. Well, then if there's no vocals, then who's got the melody? Okay. A flute. Okay. I need to find a flautist. You know, like where am I going to find a flautist? You know.
Yeah.
I need 2 of them. You know, and it just becomes this thing. But it's so fun. You know, it's very liberating in a way.
Did you ever listen to much punk rock music?
A little bit.
You ever heard of a band called NoFX?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. That guy, believe it or not, is very creative in the sense that you talked about. Like, he'll just do stuff that's very random for the sake of doing it. So he runs a he goes by Fat Mike is his name, and he started Fat Records, and he would put out these compilations back when people still bought CDs, right? And one of them was called Short Music for Short People, and it had like 101 songs on it.
Oh my god!
I can't remember what the max length is of what a CD will hold.
It's like 70 minutes, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I think each song was a maximum of maybe like 10 seconds.
Oh my god,
something like that.
Yeah.
So and it was just every kind of semi-popular to popular punk band in that day was on this compilation doing like a 10-second song or
just
whatever it was.
Whatever, yeah.
Yeah, and it was so creative. Like what they came up with was so interesting, and it would never be like the song. And then you catch yourself going like, I love that 10-second song. I wish I heard more of that 10-second song.
Right.
And then they put out an entire EP that he like went into the studio with the band with nothing, and they gave themselves the rule that I think they only had like 10 minutes to work on each song.
Oh my god.
Something silly like that, right? And then they had to record it. So it's like, yeah, a couple of them are like really shitty.
Yeah, sure.
You know, and then a couple of them are hilarious punk band songs, and then some of them are pretty good. But then you hear on their later albums, like, I remember hearing a guitar riff that was a little similar to that.
Yeah.
And you
I love seeing that stuff.
Yeah, and it's like that's what I feel like those exercises are good for. Yeah. Is it's going to open you up creatively. Maybe not even on this album, but it might be on the next one. Like all of a sudden, you just tweaked a little bit of how you think about music.
Do you know when my wife and I, like when one of us is stuck on an idea, we're trying to like, how am I going to do this? We play the game where it's like, okay, come up with the worst idea possible to solve this problem. What would it be? You know. And we've done that for like all kinds of problems, but like one of them was like, okay, what's the worst way that you could market a new album? You know, and it's like you could go out in the street and just throw CDs at people and just hit them, you know. But you start with this idea of like, okay, it's laughable, but then like after a while, your brain just is in this mode of like thinking in a different way, right? Yeah. And then all of a sudden, an idea pops out, and you're like, shit, that one's actually good.
Yeah.
You know, I lost the game. I lost the game, but like, let's write that one down.
And you're like, somehow we got right back to throwing CDs at people. That's what we landed on.
Yeah, no, they're basically frisbees at this point, right? It hurts, man. It hurts. Like
not having CDs,
not well, having CDs and not being able to sell them.
Not having
other than as it's basically another form of merch, right? Because like if I sell you a CD, like I have little to no guarantee that you can actually use it.
Yeah, I mean,
but you might want it.
I think a lot of new cars now don't even have CD players.
Yeah, mine doesn't.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So it's like, ooh, I really want CDs to come back like vinyl did, and just being like people are really enthusiastic about this form of media, kind of how people are about cassette tapes. But cassette tapes just aren't coming back like people want them to.
Well, the fidelity is like it's bad enough without like the kind of vintage warmth that you have. You know, it's like it's the worst of both worlds in my opinion.
But music that was made for CDs in that time period, there is something about the way those sound versus those same songs streamed.
Oh yeah, like mastering for CDs is a very different process than mastering for streaming or mastering for vinyl.
And
right?
CDs sound so good. They sound so good, you know? And so I'm hoping there will be this enthusiast revolution for just CDs. That way they don't all just go to waste.
We're going to find out. Yeah,
I think so, man, because vinyl's got its own characteristics. And I don't think vinyls and CDs would ever compete. It would just be nice to go like, oh, I love listening to this on vinyl, but I love listening to this on CD.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
I think that would be really cool.
I just feel like you don't have that many audio files anymore. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, because if you grow up with streaming, it's all you know, and you might not even care to like sit down and like listen to the difference. You know what I mean?
Maybe, but at the same time, it's like cars now are incredible, right? They're safe, they're fast. Everything about like a Honda Accord, even like a bland car. Everything about that car now is better than like your family car in 1950, right? But people still love to get like a 1950s car and, you know, restore it. And people who don't even care about cars, when they walk by, you know, a old restored car, even if they've never even thought about those old cars, they still kind of get caught up in the beauty of it. I think they still go like, wow, that's interesting to look at. You know, I like just the aesthetic of this, even though I know nothing about it.
Right. Well, then it becomes merchandise, right?
Yeah,
but it no longer has utility.
But it's still art. They still like looking at it, and I guarantee you, if they got a ride in that car, if whoever owned it was just like, "Do you want to go for a ride like around the block in it?" They'd be like,
"Hell yeah,
absolutely, yeah." And like the experience of sitting on like an older bench seat where there's no like airbags or anything, like all the stuff that is functionally making a car better is gone, and it's just like, wow, that's a really beautiful dash. Like I remember looking at an old car one time, and there was a hole in the dashboard that went underneath the car. And it was what they used to do is throw their cigarettes in that hole.
Oh, my Lord.
So that they would go out under the car. And just there's just these little engineering things where you're like, oh, wow. I think that's what vinyl, hopefully CDs, tapes, whatever, I think that's going to happen to the streamers. I think you're still going to have people who love music so much that they start looking into the history. And then all it takes is for like, you know, a 13-year-old kid to go, they have vinyl stores around here? And then they go like, wow. And, you know, there's nothing quite like seeing the artwork on a vinyl that you love that you've never seen before, right? So like if you've streamed that song and you've only ever seen a little digital thumbnail of the album cover, right? But now you see it on
or like
12
you know,
by
you're
12.
sitting down and you're reading the lyrics and the liner notes alongside it, and you're thinking like, who the hell produced this thing, or like who played the drums? You know?
I started doing these short little vinyl reviews. Like I have this one hasn't come out yet. The record's come out, but like, you ever heard of Sierra Farrell? She's really good. She's blowing up. But little things. It's like the artwork's beautiful, but then like I love how the inner sleeve has all the lyrics.
Yeah. Oh, lost art, man. It's a lost art.
Because,
even just like the design and the layout for these things.
It's beautiful. And so I started
I'm glad that's coming back for sure.
Yeah, I started doing just quick little short videos where it's like, I'm not even reviewing an album. I'm just showing you vinyl. Like whether I love it or not, like look how these people packaged it.
Just look at it.
Yeah, because it is fun. And it's like, you get into the mind of that artist of like, I wonder why they chose this. I wonder why this was important to them. And
well, and then you can go follow them on Instagram and find out. You know what I mean? Yeah.
And that's so much of what music is, right? It's not just the song. It's like your album as well. It's like if somebody streams your album, 50-50 chance if they're going to look at the artwork. But the artwork is engaging, right?
I love it.
I like it. And the artwork helps form a story of what this album is talking about as well. So like as you're listening to it, looking at the artwork, you're like, oh, maybe these lyrics mean that. Even if it's not what it means, it's just it puts the story together.
It starts to I mean, like the idea is to create a world, right?
So I think even though this younger generation streams everything, I do believe you're going to have your audio files. I think it's just they're still learning about it. Like they're trying to figure out.
I sure hope so, man.
I think so.
I'm going to stay more positive.
Vinyl sales keep going up and up every year.
I know.
It's a slow trend.
CD sales are not, though.
Yeah, well, it's got to die before it comes back, right?
That's fair. It's got to be uncool first.
Yeah.
I think we're in the uncool phase right now.
There was a scene on Parks and Recreation. Have you watched that?
Yeah.
Leslie Knope's husband, Ben, he's like, he wants to DJ at some Pawnee event they're doing for the city. And instead, Aziz Ansari's character, Tom, he's doing it. And he's always like the cool guy. He knows all the club music, everything, right? So he's at like what is essentially, I think, like a high school dance or something. And he's playing all like the best club music. They're just so fucking bored. All the kids are like, this is lame. And then Ben decides like, I'll go get some of my old records. And it's all like, 80s music and like really moody kind of music. And they're like, their mind's blown by it, and they all love it. And then some kid's like, I've heard of this. I have it on CD. I'm going to go get it. That's how it was meant to be heard.
Oh, my God.
On compact disc.
I love it.
I think it's going to happen.
The kids are all right. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be... It's really interesting, actually, like now that we're in the social media phase, and especially, again, with TikTok, is that like you get to experience so much of what young people are doing, and I like to consider myself a young person, but I'm also very aware that I'm not part of Gen Z.
Yeah.
And I have so much hope for them. I feel so good about so many things, but one of the things that I love the most about them is that like they love being so fucking weird. They love being weird. And I'm like, hell yeah, dude. Be as weird as you fucking want to, because like you don't owe normalcy to anyone. Not your boss, not your parents, not your preacher, like whoever, like no one. You don't owe it to anyone.
Yeah.
Be yourself, be authentically you, be as weird as you want to be. I am raising the weirdest fucking kids you can imagine.
Yeah.
But they're good kids, like they're kind, they're sweet, but like
if no one's getting hurt, do what you want to do.
Yeah.
Right? Like if no one's suffering by your actions, have fun, man.
But also go experiment, like see what happens, like fuck around and find out. Like you will find out. You know what I mean?
They do seem to do that, and it's like I put a lot of my gauge on young people, like by like if people my age or older are getting upset, it's probably pretty cool, actually.
Yeah.
Like whatever they're doing, it's probably pretty cool. If someone's like, they just shouldn't be doing it, and it's like, well, let me check out what they're doing. That sounds interesting now.
Yeah. You know what? Like, I'm a millennial. If you can't see me, I'm going to be 35 this year. And what I hate most about millennials is that it is so important to them to be clever. Not smart, not wise, clever. Like they want to be quippy, they want to be witty, they want you to feel like you have this, that they have this like amazing intellect, that like and that they're, so they have to keep up with trends and they have to know what's going on, and like even when it has nothing to do with them, and they have to be able to, they have to have something to say about everything. And I'm like, you could also just stop talking for a minute, and you could learn so much.
Yeah.
But I think that it's a product of how we were raised. I say we, I assume.
Yeah, yeah. No, we're similar age. Yeah, I'm 37, and they like think about what we were raised on though. Sitcoms. It's all about little.
It's
punchy,
the one-liners,
yeah, and laugh track,
and cruel sometimes, man. Jeez.
Yeah. Have you heard about how Gen Z? Like they're shitting all over shows like Friends and stuff. They're like, and not like one of the worst shows. They're like, it's horrible. Like it should be canceled.
I mean, you go back and watch some of these things, and you're just like, I don't know what we were thinking.
Yeah,
I don't know why we thought it was funny. I don't.
Well,
but then I'll still laugh, and I'm like, fuck,
it's still funny.
They still got their hooks in me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think a lot about what we do now that is going to be absolutely, like unacceptable in another 15, 20 years. Because it's happening, right? There's something we're saying on this podcast now where they're just like, I cannot believe you said that on a recorded medium.
It's true, yeah.
And because you see the same thing, like when you see, 80-year-old people who are racist still, but they're friendly and polite, and you see it's like, that's just ingrained. Like they don't even realize that's bad.
I don't know.
Not all. I'm not saying like you're
hashtag not all 80-year-olds, but
well, what I mean is there's obviously like outward like I'm racist and I don't give a shit. But then there's like people who would still use like words and phrases about different cultures.
But so antiquated language is definitely a thing, right?
Yeah. And it's like people from the World War II era, how they would describe Japanese people, right?
Oof, yeah.
That's what I mean. That type of stuff where they're just like, well, that's just what we called them.
Right.
It's like, okay, yeah, but
that was the vernacular.
but
Right.
And so there's a bunch of that going on. It's like our generation when we were in middle school and high school. It's like how common was it to use the slang for gay that starts with an F?
Right.
Right.
Or just to call something that you don't like gay.
Exactly.
Right? It's just
Yeah.
like,
yeah, and it's like
constantly.
now if you even said that word, right? I'm saying the F word instead of that because I know. But it's like if you would have went back to 8th grade me, it's like we were saying that all the time, and didn't like we weren't even associating it with gay people.
So here's a question though, like, right? You learned,
Sure,
right?
Yeah.
You know better, and now you are doing better, right?
Right.
So what is it about this 80-year-old person that's not there? And I think it's access to information.
Yeah,
You
well,
know,
yeah,
I think we are in a place now where we can be lifelong learners in a very real way and in a way that is not accessible or wasn't accessible to people of the boomer generation, right? But, I look at my grandfather is still alive and he is 90, he's going to be 96 this year, right? And he's still learning.
Yeah.
And I love that about him. He wants to learn, and the more he learns, the more nuanced his perception of world events and of what's happening, all around us and in his own community, the more nuanced it becomes, right? So, like, to me, access to information is a huge thing and also a desire to learn, right? Because if you want to say it's ingrained and there's nothing to be done about it, then I think it's a cop-out. You know what I mean?
it is a cop-out. Yeah, I totally agree. But in their mind, it comes down to that unwillingness to learn and adapt, right? I did things this way. Why won't things just go back to the way that I like them?
Right.
When in reality, nothing has ever gone back to the way of anything.
Right.
It's always moved forward.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, yeah.
But there are also plenty of 80-year-olds who do still want to be learning and are, changing their language, when they are corrected, like, I don't know. I have these conversations with my parents a lot, because like they're liberals, but they're not progressive. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They're Democrats.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Which is now no longer the,
which is they're basically centrists, right?
Right. Yeah.
So no, but they want to be progressive. They don't know how to be progressive. Mm-hmm. So it's a constant process of trying to like help them find resources to learn, like, why are we saying things differently now? Or like, why are we hearing more about people being trans? And like, what does that actually mean? And like, what is the experience like? And like, I can have these conversations with them and help them understand, because I have a more diverse social circle than they do. Right.
Yeah.
And they want to learn. And sometimes they just stop and say, I don't understand.
And that's awesome.
But I
It's
will
awesome.
but I will respect it.
Yeah.
And that to me is like that's huge
That's
for
all you
someone
need
in
too,
that
though.
generation.
It's like that's the big thing. I think a lot of people like talking about trans specifically. It's like, look, you don't have to understand it. It's fine. Just the acceptance of like, I don't get it, but you don't seem to be bothering anyone. So
Yeah, it's like,
all right. Like, like what's the
it's
issue?
like tattoos or like dyeing your hair. Like if you want to consider it a choice, then you can. Mm-hmm. Like, you're wrong, but you can. But at the same time, like, you can just let people live their own lives,
Right?
Because it has nothing to
exactly.
do with you. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, and people feel like they should have control over what they see, over what's in front of them, or what their children see, or what their friends and family see, and that's a really hard conversation to have. I don't want to get too political. But.
Well, no, I think a lot of that is rooted in just kind of the very like DNA of humans. I think part of survival in the past was be very wary of something different. Like, and I mean like way back. When you're if you're living in a cave and it's like, what is this? Because I mean, if you look at like my dog, right? If we're walking down the street, he's a very friendly dog, but if he sees somebody he's never met before, his first instinct isn't to run up and be happy. His first instinct, he's kind of like feeling them out. He's a little more defensive position. And it's just I think that's like an evolutionary trait of survival, right? Be a little wary of like new things that I don't understand. And I do wonder a lot if it's ingrained in us as people of like, that's your initial reaction because that's like an old survival tool. It's just now being used incorrectly.
Yeah, and like I would be happy to say like maybe that is just your initial reaction, and maybe there's nothing you can do about that. But also, your initial reaction does not have to be your response.
I was going to say that's the key is your initial reaction,
right?
And then I just think you have a generation. I think every generation is getting less stubborn, And I think, like millennials are more stubborn than Gen Z, and I think Gen Xers.
I feel like the millennials are just, we're the doormats of all. We're just like walk all over this place.
Because as we get older, I see it. Like the way you see millennials talk about Gen Z,
right?
It sounds like boomers talking about Gen X,
Ugh.
right? And I do think millennials we're in between all that, so you're a little bit of a middle child. But I do think every generation is kind of more accepting of new stuff. Like we're clearly more accepting of new ideas than like the baby boomer generation would be, right? And then they're more accepting of ideas than the generation before that. But I think it's just every generation gets a little less stubborn and a little more open to be like, okay, that's probably not going to be a problem. We can deal with that.
Yeah.
Like it's strange to me, but it's going to be fine.
Yeah. And one of the hardest things to remember is that like we're speaking from an American perspective, right? Is that like it's not necessarily the case all around the world.
True.
And in some places, things are progressing very differently, But I think you're right. Definitely that like there's this idea of like that's not how it is. That's not how it's done. Or that's not how it should be, right? And feeling like you need to be in control of that. And like I do think it comes back to this idea of like there is so much in society and in American society and in our system that makes us feel powerless and makes us feel vulnerable and insecure and weak. And we have to we have this knee-jerk reaction that's very negative against anything that confuses us or makes us feel like we are at a disadvantage, right? And I think like at the heart of it, a lot of the the kind of cultural wars and the sort of like the identity politics that we run into is based on a deep insecurity that like we, to a lesser extent, have than Gen X and boomers. But like it's all there because like they're the ones who raised us, right? So like insecure people are going to raise insecure people because they don't know how to securely attach to other people because they were not taught that by their parents, So we're finally getting to a place now because we have therapy where we're able to sort of more, we're able to raise children who are more securely attached to their parents, and as a result are going to be more securely and secure and well-adjusted individuals, like independent people. It's this weird sort of like paradox that like if you foster stronger connection with your kid, they're not going to become less independent. They're actually going to be more independent because they're going to feel more confident because you have created an environment in which they can feel confident, So we're raising kids, and I think we're starting to see this with Gen Z, right? That like they're growing up more securely attached and as a result, more independent and more, well-adjusted, maybe is like, I don't know. It's a very generalized term, right? But the idea is that like they have confidence, as young people that we didn't have, and we look at them and it's like, what the fuck, like when I was 12 years old, let me show you my 12-year-old, middle school picture, and then I'm looking at a 12-year-old who's all like, looking so fucking cool, and I'm just like, God.
You're like, what are you, like,
damn
25? Like, can you get me into clubs? Can you get me into places? Like,
but not even that. It's just like, you don't give a fuck.
No.
Like, I wish I didn't give a fuck, but I'd lose my job if I gave a,
It is interesting. I mean, and that's what I mean by like sometimes you have to realize like, wow, this is kind of the greatest time to be alive. And I guess we should put a scope on it. Like if you're in a developed country like America, right?
I don't like that word, but go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, you talked about that earlier.
We could say Western. That's fine.
Western. Yeah. However you want to phrase it. And, but because it's like, now it's really commonplace to see someone like covered in tattoos or dyed haired or something working at a professional job.
Right.
And people don't really bat an eye at it. Whereas just 20 years ago, it was like, you better cover those damn tattoos up if you ever think you're going to get employed.
Get them removed.
Do you want to work at Sonic or not?
Right. You going back to prison?
Yeah. And so I do think we're getting better in this country at looking at people deeper than that. Right. Yeah. Just going like, oh, they have tattoos. That's cool.
So, so it's important to recognize that like if we can give more people opportunities to be involved and have their voice heard, then I think that's where we have to start, from a change-making perspective, But again,
I think it's going that way. I think it's just slow.
Yeah,
it's just so slow. Like, you feel like it should happen so quickly, and it doesn't. It takes a couple generations for anything to move, really. Well,
it's impossible to reach a critical mass because, again, you have everyone's got to work all the goddamn time, you know?
Yeah, I mean, but that alone, I wish more people, you know, would realize it's like, look, whether you're liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, whatever, you all really, at the root of it all, you want the same things, right? You just want a happy life. You want to feel safe. You don't want to feel threatened by whatever might threaten you. You just want to live comfortably and happy. You're just arguing about how that happens, right? But really, truly, you want the same thing. And it's just, again, I think it's just hard for, if you're a hardcore conservative or liberal or whatever, it's hard for you to view the other side as a human, right? You're viewing it as this person who's attacking your beliefs and a threat, rather than just like, no, they think that's the best way. You think this is the best way, and neither of you are willing to budge. And you gotta compromise a little bit. Like, you almost have to be happy knowing like you're not going to get everything you want, but if you can get some of what you want, that's still going to be a win, and you're still moving it forward a little bit. Yeah. Because the all or none thing is just going to leave the opposite side angry and jaded, and you know, now that pendulum's going to swing harder the other direction.
I mean, I think it comes back, you know, to that mentality of scarcity, right? Mm-hmm. Is it like, you know, by definition, that's a conservative viewpoint, right? To assume that you have less of the things that you need than perhaps you actually do, right? So if you take this mindset of scarcity and you start to think, you know, I want all of those things, but there's a but, right? Because I can't have those things unless it comes at the expense of someone else having these things. Because surely there can't be enough for all of us to actually have everything we want, and it's naive to think otherwise. Hence, all these bleeding heart liberals who think we can save the planet and everyone can just be happy and we can wipe out world hunger and we can save the earth. It's a fairy tale in their minds, you know? Mm-hmm. And if you can actually imagine that better world in a way that you can truly believe it's possible, you know, and maybe crunch some numbers and see that it's actually, mm-hmm. you know, truly possible.
Right.
You know, but the idea is that, like, you know, yes, we all want the same things. Some of us want those things for ourselves, and some of them want them for everyone. And I think that is kind of where a big part of this dilemma lies. Because in an ideal world, the conservative would want them for everyone, mm-hmm. but they don't, on some fundamental level, believe that it's possible. And a lot of religious upbringing is here to tell them that life is actually meant to be difficult. It is meant to be suffering because there's something better on the other side of it, right? Mm-hmm. So your job here is to suffer until you die so that you can get your golden ticket, you know? Yeah. And I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about all of these things, you know, but I think that story, that story that was told like from Puritan times, mm-hmm. you know, in like the very founding of America, you know, from a white Western perspective, is so deeply ingrained in our education system and in our, you know, in our conversations about religion and about politics and about race, you know, and everything. It's in there, you know, this mm-hmm. idea that like you're supposed to suffer a little bit. Yeah. You're supposed to be a little unhappy, you know, and the idea that like bad things will happen actually does not necessarily mean that you are going to suffer, mm-hmm. you know, like, you know, from like a Buddhist perspective, like the idea of suffering being sort of like holding on to the pain because it gives you this sense that like you are alive and in control and it's this real thing that you can hold. It's this tangible thing, right? And it's easy to see it because it's right in front of you. So you fixate on it, you hold on to it, and that's what causes the suffering, right? Whereas if you experience the pain and allow it to move through you, then it can keep going, right? Mm-hmm. But if you hold on to it, then it can't go anywhere. It's going to stay with you, right? So this idea of suffering is really hard, right? Because like you have this very Christian notion of like suffering has value, right? And suffering is like it's a teacher, and it's, you know, and all of these things. And on the other side, thinking like, well, what if no one had to suffer, mm-hmm. right? Like, what if that wasn't even a thing, you know? Like, yes, there will still be pain, there will still be hardship, there will still be death. You know, all these things are going to be here, but like, it doesn't necessarily equate to suffering in the way that we're maybe thinking of it. Mm-hmm. And I think it does boil down to like optimism,
Right.
you know, believing that it's possible or believing that it's even desirable,
Right.
you know.
I do think that's something that's very difficult for people to wrap their minds around, and the ways you can see that right now in our current society are when you talk about free education and universal basic income. Those two things, right? People have
healthcare, yeah.
Healthcare, yeah. People have a hard time thinking like you can do those.
Yeah.
And it's like, look, I'm not saying we're going to get it perfect right from the jump, but you got to get the ball rolling on some of these things. Because to your point about scarcity and all that, it's like, money is, okay, like I know currently we have to have it the way we function right now. But money is a totally made up thing, all right? Like you can still, in the long term, you can have a system that doesn't work this way, right? And that should be the goal, is how do you get to where you don't have to do this stuff in order for the wheels to keep turning on society? That way you can focus on whatever your passion is, right? And it's not like everyone's passion is going to be making a painting or some music. Some people's passion is going to be engineering and solving real problems. It's kind of like if you watch like Star Trek or Orville or any of those shows, right? There's no money anymore.
Right.
They don't do any of that. But people still want to achieve status. They still want to, leave something that benefits humanity in ways. And I think that would really happen. Yeah, of course, if you have universal basic income, you're going to have some people who do absolutely nothing with their lives ever. And they just take the bare minimum of whatever. It's like, great, that's their life. If that's what they want to do, that's fantastic.
Yeah,
it's not hurting you.
They don't deserve to die.
Yeah. It's not hurting you
Right.
if they live off the bare minimum but are living. And the same way with healthcare, right? It's like people think like, well, why do they get free healthcare when I've been paying for insurance? And it's like, you're thinking about it the wrong way, man. You can have free. You should also have free healthcare.
Why are you paying for insurance?
Yeah. Like I have a relative who was like, if you get on this, if we go to, government healthcare or single payer, whatever you want to call it, we'll be waiting, 5 years to get a knee replacement if we need it. That's what they do in these other countries. And I'll talk to them and be like, well, when was the last time you had insurance? And they're like, well, I haven't had insurance in like 10 years. It's like, so you've been waiting 10 years for healthcare. Right. You haven't gotten any healthcare in 10 years. That sounds worse than what you just described. If that's your biggest fear of the new system, you're still better off with the new system.
Right.
But it's just, they always feel like someone's trying to get ahead of them or pull one over. Or like if you talk about raising minimum wage, to $15 an hour, and somebody who currently makes 15 is like, well, why would a McDonald's worker get paid $15 an hour like me? And it's like, no, you also deserve a little more.
Right.
And that's how you get the ball rolling, is if all of a sudden you could go to McDonald's and make the same, your employer is hopefully going to have to play a little catch up as well.
Yeah, and that's a problem, right? Because then, of course, you end up raising cost of goods, and everything becomes more inflated.
You end up raising cost of goods.
That's the reason. Yeah.
If these big corporations decide we have to keep making endless profit every year. Right. This year has to be more profitable than last year, and the next year has to be more profitable than this year. And it's like, that's no way to run a business.
Well, it's because your business is. I mean, our whole economic system is built on the market, the stock market, right? This sort of nebulous idea, of like confidence in these, in these. And again, like companies.
I invest in the stock market, but it's a totally made up thing that doesn't really matter. Like really, really, if you break it down, it's like it only matters because we want it to matter.
Right.
And again, you could, in a more utopian sense, it's like you can get rid of all that. Like we could just have the stuff, make the stuff. It's going to take generations and generations to get there.
It's a very long conversation, though, to say, and again, this is a big part of it, right? Is like, you can't believe in it if you can't imagine it, right? And if you don't start the process of saying, what could it look like? What would it look like? How would that actually work? Can I even conceptualize of a world that has that, or doesn't have that? I think that becomes a huge part of it, right? Is like there's a lack of imagination in a sense, right? This idea that like we can't do that. Well, we're not doing it. That doesn't mean that we can't do it.
Right.
So the question you should be asking is like, how can we do it? Or what does it look like to do it? Because we can hear like, oh, everything's going to go crazy. And it's like, maybe. And then what? or like, can we make it not go crazy?
Right.
You know, like,
Is that the only option?
Can you think about that? Like, we could probably figure this out if we talk about it.
Yeah.
But it's hard to talk about it, you know, because, you know,
Yeah.
you're seeing a world that someone else doesn't see,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and that's a result of spending time thinking about it and trying to conceptualize it, you know, which is a little bit of a luxury. You know, we don't all have that luxury.
Right.
But also like just the desire for that, you know, is sort of like, instead of thinking, how can I better my own situation, you're thinking, how can I better everyone's situation?
I think we'll get there. I think it's, you know, obviously it'll take a long time, but I think it moves.
We kind
that
of
way.
don't have a choice, right? We're either going to get there or we're not going to be here.
The way we conduct, you know, our lives around money and work, it's not sustainable in a really long-term view.
Well, especially when you start considering like further technological advancements with AI and, you know,
these jobs
learning.
won't exist. So things like universal basic income will be more of a necessity. And then at one point when everyone's on universal basic income, we'll realize like, well, what is the money thing anyway?
Yeah, why were we doing this at all? Yeah.
Like the fact that universal basic income is even in the conversation tells you that money is kind of a silly thing. It's just something we're going to have to put up with for, you know, more generations, but it is going to go away. Just like when you watch these old science fiction shows and, you know, it's like you look at them, you know, talking on this brick back up to the spaceship, and it's like, yeah, we have iPhones now, we do that. And then when you look at them, you know, on a tablet that has all the information, it's like, yeah, we've got all that now.
Right.
So I think it'll go that way. It's just going to take longer.
Well,
and it makes me excited because then you'd have all the time in the world to make as much music as you wanted to.
Right. And that's kind of what brings it back, is this idea that like can you imagine a world in which you can create without the need for it to be marketable? Without, you know, like, I made an album that way because I don't rely on album sales to keep a roof over my head. You know, there are a lot of artists who do, and they have no choice but to make things that they know will be marketable, and they have to work with certain types of producers that will make things that are marketable. And they work with labels who will push it to all the right people to make sure that you hear it 30 times a day on Kiss FM.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, at what point does this stop being a creative process for you? You know, I've never gotten to talk to, you know, like any of those like crazy, insanely famous musicians, but I have talked to a lot of like really, really well respected and well known independent musicians, and they still love what they do.
Right.
You know, they're working their asses off, but they still love what they're doing because they can do it the way that they want to do it. You know, if they want to be on the road for, you know, 6, 7, 8 months of the year, they can do that. If they don't have to, you know. But the process of building a fan base that supports that is so difficult.
Yeah.
You know, it's so much work. So there's this idea of kind of paying your dues, right? But I'm just like, I want everyone creating things.
Yeah.
I don't care. Like, I don't want you to have to be a professional to write a song. Write a song. It'll probably suck. I'll probably still love it. I love all of it. You know what I mean? Like, let me hear it. Let me hear what's going on with you. I don't need the perfectly, you know, $1 million produced records. I don't need that in my life. It's there, and it'll probably always be there, and that's fine. But I want more. I want to hear your voice more. You know what I mean? So I don't know. It's frustrating for me because like I see so many musicians who like they have to get out of the game because like they don't have a choice, right? And like myself included, you know, like I'm still performing and I'm still writing and I'm still making music, but like it's no longer the career. You know what I mean? It was for a while, and now it's not because it can't be. You know, I don't live in a world that makes that possible for me right now. You know, if it becomes possible in the future, that's great. You know, but it's no longer something that I even need or like am you know, burning with desire for.
Most of the bands I talk to, that's where they're at. They're like, you know, look, even if I was offered a big tour with someone, they're like, the odds of me going on that slim, because that means I have to quit my career,
right?
Uproot my family, go on a tour, and then I might come back and still not have a lot of money in my pocket and have to like go get my job back again.
Right.
You know, there's no guarantee. They're like, but I can keep making great music and put it out there for anyone to listen to at any time.
It's just my job.
It's just that inflection point, that jump of like, okay, now we do this for a living and the money's okay.
Right. And I think a lot of musicians starting out, like they have this sense that like there's a pipeline that's like more accessible than it actually is, or they think it's impossible and they never try. Right. But I think you have to get more creative. There are so many ways to make money with music. And if you are the kind of hustler that, that you have to be in order to do this and actually make a living, then you can do it.
Yeah.
But you just got to get really creative. You can do songwriting camps. You can do, there's so many ways to make money with music that have nothing to do with gigging or touring or selling merch.
Yeah.
But you think of those three as like, those are the holy grail. It's like, it's tickets, it's merch, and it's touring. And that's it. Or a record deal if you want to win the lottery, right?
Right.
But even the record deals, you don't make any money.
Nowadays, I want to get more, I want to interview more record labels on this podcast. I haven't got to interview, but just to ask those questions from they'll probably get offended, but just to ask it from a constructive.
What do you actually do now?
Well, yeah, but seriously, though, it's like, tell me as a label.
You're going to get me in trouble, man. Yeah.
No, but it's like, tell me as a label what you feel, you give to an artist that like we need to go on. And it's not an insult. It's like, it's your opportunity to say like, this is why labels are important.
Right. Well, and independent labels especially, right?
Yeah.
Like they are very important. They do a lot of good in terms of like getting people out and helping them get funding, because like those are the things that like stand in most people's way, right? They don't have money to go on tour or take time off their job to go on tour, or they don't have money for the gear or the studio or whatever it is, and those things are more accessible, but you still got to buy the equipment, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's so wild with anything artistic, right? Because you can put out the most honest thing that you can put out where you're your genuine self and it is objectively good, but people just don't like it.
Yeah.
You can't control what someone likes and doesn't like, And and like how much music have you heard that you're like, eh. And then 5 years later you hear it and you're like, why did I not think this was good back then? This is incredible, And a lot of it just depends on at what point in your life did that music hit you?
Who were you and where were you? Yeah.
Because you're a totally different person about every 5 years, And so, it's like you might as well just create what you love because you can't control who likes it anyway.
Well, that's the thing, though, is that like one of the things that these labels can do is they can play the numbers better, right? Because like if I could put my music in front of 10 million people, even if only 1% of them like it, that's pretty dang good. You know what I mean? Like, I'm okay with that.
One of the little punk rock bands I was in, we would go to all the Warped Tour stops during the summer. Like, we would tour and do our shows, and then when there was a Warped Tour stop, we would go to that. And what we would do is just sell. This was when people were listening to CDs, right? So we would just play our CD like to the line of people going in and out and try to sell them out of hand. And, there were about 20 to 30,000 people a day that would go to Warped Tours. And that's the game we were playing is like, dude, if we can just get 1%. And that's what we were selling anywhere from, 100 to 250 CDs a day, depending on the stop.
Amazing.
Yeah. At, $10 a piece.
Yeah.
We're making legit money. And it was all just hustle, And, we were selling more albums than some of the people on that tour and making more money than they were because we weren't on a label. It was all DIY.
Right.
But it also meant like we had to uproot ourselves for 3 months and go in a van. And
it's your job to be selling those
exactly.
CDs, right?
It's a lot of work. Yeah. But it's a numbers game. It's like there's 8 billion people on the planet. Right. If you could show what you do,
your music's not that bad.
Yeah, if you could show what you're doing to everyone, and like you said, if you got 0.5% of 8 billion people,
I mean, Jesus,
that's your career. You're good to go.
You're set. Yeah,
and like you said, your stuff can't suck so bad that no one in the world likes it.
Right. And again, it's not the point, right?
Yeah.
The point is not to get 100,000 followers. The point is not to get $100,000, a month, let's say, being a musician. The point is to share it with as many people as you can so that as many people who can get some value out of it have the opportunity to do that. And I think when you stop thinking about it in terms of your music having value and adding value to people's lives, and you start thinking about it as your music as a product that you have to convince people to buy or give you money for, then you've lost the joy. The joy is gone. It's fucking gone, man.
You kind of just drove right into something that I've been thinking a lot about lately, which is how to ask this question to bands, musicians, comics. And so I'm going to try it on you because you basically just asked it yourself, which is, this album that you just created, What made you feel like you needed to put this into the world? Like, what in your mind said, I would like this to exist and people need to hear this, or it would help certain people if they hear it? Or why did you feel like this is worth time to create and this is what I want to do?
What makes you so special?
Yeah. But no, what in your mind said, like, I think I'm going to make an album and it's going to be kind of like this?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, short answer was the pandemic, right? Like, pandemic laid bare a lot of the foundations, especially financially, of what we're doing here, and it really showed people in the workforce how little anyone gives a shit about them. And I don't mean that in a demeaning way, because like I value all human life, right? But this system does not, right? So I was looking at that, and I was going through some personal things, new parent, pandemic, like wondering, how I'm going to keep my family safe in a physical way, in an economic sense, emotionally, like how are we all going to navigate these unprecedented waters, and I started, so I was writing songs because that's how I process things personally, right? And it's how I process what I see. So, I had these songs about sort of like things that were going on for me personally, these songs about sort of things I was seeing with people in my life that I care about, and then things that I was seeing on sort of a larger scale of sort of the world around me, right? And it became this sort of microcosm of like self-community, global community, right? Your immediate community and your global community. And when I lived in Vietnam, actually, that was one of the most amazing things to see. And it's a communist government, right? But the way that the family extends naturally into the community, into your local community, and then naturally extends into your national identity was incredible to me. It was this idea that like, if you're in my community, you are in my family. If you're in my country, you're in my family. And for me, even as a visitor for, I was living there for a year, I was welcomed in ways that like I didn't think anyone could possibly, Can you imagine if like, let's say you work at a school, right? You're a teacher, and like there's a guest lecturer he's here from China, right? Historical enemies of your nation, right? He's from China, and he's here for a year. He doesn't speak any English. He's here teaching Mandarin, let's say, right? You also happen to speak Mandarin because you're one of the other, faculty, that teaches Mandarin at this school. Okay. You meet him, and after 2 minutes of talking to him, you invite him to your house and say, come have dinner with me. Okay, I could see that maybe happening. Okay, now imagine this man walks down the street to get a cup of coffee. The barista at the coffee shop says, come to my house for dinner. That doesn't happen. Because that's fucking insane, right? It's this amazing, but when you live in this community that is so secure in its own identity, and it's so secure in what it is and what it wants and what it cares about, because it comes from a place of like the I, of the self, right? And then of the family, the neighbors, the town, the city, the province, the region, the nation, like all of that is just one big organism. And there's an understanding that it is all one thing, right? And that it all works together because it has to, because it doesn't work if it's not all working together, right? If you take that sense, then that's kind of what I was trying to do with this album, right? is trying to express that like, it's all one thing, you're dealing with some shit. Everyone's dealing with some shit, right? We're all dealing with some shit. And like our system is the cause of and potentially the solution to a lot of this shit, right? So as we're looking at it and as we're sort of navigating it, we have to recognize that we're also a part of it, right? It's not me against the system. It's me as part of the system, because I am part of the system. I benefit from the system in some ways, and I'm at a disadvantage in other ways, right? But I have to recognize that like I have a sense of place here, and I have a sense of belonging here, and I have to start from there if I'm going to change it, right? or dismantle it. Right. You have to recognize though that like you're actively participating in it, right? So this idea sort of like of get right is this sort of idea that like, okay, there are levels to this, right? It's not just one way that we have to fix things, air quotes again, sorry. You got to fix yourself. You got to get yourself right. You got to get the people that you care about, you got to get them right. And then your sort of more global community, your nation, your state, the world, honestly, like we got to get right. We got to get our shit together, a little bit, or we're going to get left behind, or we're just going to fall by the wayside and we're going to become obsolete. The only way that you can maintain any sort of active participation in this global community is by continuing to evolve and progress with it. If you refuse to do that, then there is no place for you here. And not because we don't want you here. We do want you here. But if you can't come with us, then you're not going to be with us because we're not going to stand here. We're not going to keep being here forever. We have to continue progressing and evolving. We don't have a choice. So come. That's sort of the idea.
That's awesome. I want to leave it on that, man. Thank you so much for explaining it that way. What's the best place you would like people to follow you to see what's going on? Because you're doing more shows and they're going to be full band shows.
I'm
right?
busy, yeah. My wife is like, "Why are you so busy?" Yeah, it's good. Yeah, so I've got some shows coming up April, May, and June, and then I'm going to be on the West Coast in July and August doing some shows out there, and then I should be back in the fall. I'm sure doing something.
Yeah,
I don't know yet, but I'll be releasing some new stuff. So follow me. Best places on Instagram. That's where I'm most active. I'm not super active, but I'm the most active on Instagram. It's relative, and it's just at Court Hoang. Just my name. I'm the only Court Hoang.
Isn't that great though?
Yeah, the first and the only. Yeah, I didn't have to like search for a username. Yeah, like Court Hoang 37 or whatever. Yeah,
dude, that's awesome. You just kind of slipped in like you're already working on new music.
Yeah. So we've got some things happening. So the band is kind of new. I had this trio band, and on the last tour last summer, the last stop of the tour, my drummer was just like, "Hey man, I gotta tell you something." And I was like, "Fuck," So he moved away, and I had to find a new drummer. I found this new drummer, and he's an old friend, but we started working together. And I was like, okay, maybe this is cool. I don't know. It feels different. It feels weird. And Joseph, my bassist, who is also my producer, he looked at me. He was like, "You know what you need?" And I was like, "A lead guitar player, a keyboard player. Like, what do I need?" And he was like, "You need singers." And I was like, "What?" He was like, "Yeah, you need people who sing, and not people who play an instrument and also sing, but you need singers." And I was like, "That's a really good point. Like, I have very high standards when it comes to like the blending and the technique and things like I need people who I feel like I can talk to about these things." I was like, "Okay, let's try it." So he brought in some singers, and I was like, "They're great. They're amazing. We've been doing some really cool stuff." They both also happen to play piano. So I was just like,
are these the ones that are in the videos you've been releasing?
Yeah. So it's the 5 of us now.
Whatever space y'all were in where it's got like some pink backlighting and you're chilling on a couch singing.
That's
that is like the coolest little, like seeing them just casually sitting and doing
cool,
all, I was like, God, that's a really cool shot.
We were going for the NPR like.
Yeah, it was great. It was great.
Yeah. That's a studio in Fort Worth called The Bolt.
Okay.
It's a really cool space if you need any photo or video stuff. And the owner is like, he's really chill and he'll work with you on like whatever you need to do. It's great. But yeah, so there's the 5 of us, but we can do, I do a lot of solo stuff for like more like money gigs is what I call them. If someone needs like play the farmer's market or someone needs like, play my like cocktail hour at my wedding or whatever. Yeah. I'll do stuff like that. And then we do the trio, which is more like rock. And then the 5 of us, we do a little bit of the rock, but we also do a little more of the more like soul and some of the bluesy kind of stuff. We can experiment a little bit more and play around a little bit more. So it's a lot of fun.
And when are we going to fulfill your dream of having a full orchestra behind you?
You know what? That's my dream has always been to tour with an orchestra, right? Like Amanda Palmer style.
You're gonna have to find some deep pockets somehow.
I
know we just talked about tearing down capitalism, but in the short term, you need some money.
Right. I'm going to need some broke young musicians who don't need money. So this release show last year was kind of a proof of concept, right? We did it at the Margot Jones Theater, which is a really neat space, but it has no dedicated sound. We DIY'd all of the production ourselves. I was up there moving the lighting rigs and like, I was programming the light board myself and stuff like that. And I had my my engineer come in, and he had to bring all this equipment in. He had to rent a bunch of stuff. It was just all DIY. But I was like, okay, now I know I can do this. So next time we can get a space that has more of this, and I don't have to be fussing with it, and we can have like the production that we want. So now it's just a question of having enough people to buy tickets to something like that, so that I can rent out a venue. If I can rent out the venue and make the money back on it, then we can make it happen.
We're ready to go.
We can make it happen.
All right.
So
that's the new mission.
you talk to the Kessler, and to see what they want to do.
The Kessler. Is the Kessler stage big enough for that?
Yeah,
it is.
Oh, we can make it work.
I know the room would be great for it. I just mean the act. Could you fit the people on stage?
I think so.
Yeah, that would be a beautiful spot.
I mean, we're used to packing in pretty tight in some of these spaces, so it's okay.
Dude, that would be awesome having people up on those little balcony
sections. If I could get like
too.
15 or 20 musicians with me doing the brass and doing the woodwinds and the strings and all the percussion. Like, I want a timpani player. I can't get a timpani player because, like, I mean, I can, but like, what are they going to do?
Yeah.
It's like, it doesn't work without the rest of it. It's just weird.
I want one part. Have you seen that that clip going around where it's a guy who just has like a giant, massive sledgehammer, and he's literally only got one part in the arrangement where he just slams it down really hard on a table, and it's literally just like one massive hit.
Oh my God.
And it's like, I just want a part like that whenever you make this happen.
That we call it the dinner bell. That was this lighting fixture I told you about. Yeah.
I don't know if I can be trusted with the dinner bell, but you give me something with a little...
Oh, are you volunteering? Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't pay you, but yeah.
No. I'll do it. I just want to be a part of it. I'll dress up. We'll make it right.
Get you a mallet. You just don't. Yeah.
You can put me in the back corner of the group. I just want my 1 second.
You're gonna be front and center, sitting right in front of me. I'll be right behind you, just singing over your singing over your ear.
Actually, I'm turned around and I'm just looking into your eyes the whole time you're performing.
Okay, that's gonna get uncomfortable for me. I don't know, man.
All right, but seriously, thank you so much for coming on. I love the album. I'm going to do a proper separate review with my favorite songs and stuff that'll come out with this episode as well. But yeah, everybody go check it out, listen to it, and then keep an eye out for the shows. It sounds like you're busy, so that's good.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Having fun.
All right, thank you so much.
Yeah, much love.
The I'm a Fan of podcast, music, comedy, and more.